This podcast is presented by the Prince George's County Memorial Library System.
Hi, I'm Hawa.
I'm Kelsey.
And this is our podcast, These Books Made Me. Today we're going to be talking about Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. Friendly warning as always, this podcast contains spoilers. If you don't yet know the fate of Matt Bonner's mule, proceed with caution. We have two special guests this week.
Hi, I'm Deborah, and I am a confessed Zora Neale Hurston enthusiast.
Hi, my name's Elizabeth. I'm a librarian, and I can't say I'm a Zora Neale Hurston enthusiast, but I'm really excited to talk about this particular book. I'd like to start by asking everyone what this book means to you. And for me, the thought that comes to mind is that it hits different. Reading this book in high school, I did not get it, but as an adult, it just seems so romantic and exciting and passionate, and I didn't have the life experience in high school when I read it. So
I know me personally, so as a kid I loved to read, but like around high school I kind of fell off from it, but this was like one of the handful of books that we had to read in high school that I actually enjoyed. I mean, granted, I didn't finish because I was a little bit behind the class and they kind of finished before I did, so they were like spoilers. But yeah, it's one of the few books that stood out to me. But back then I was just like, no, I like this book. Maybe in a different life I would have finished it before the class did, but and I think because it was one of the few books by Black authors that I got to read in school that were like required, that it stood out to me. So that's kind of what that meant to me.
You're a librarian and you dare to confess that you did not finish a book for your English class in high school?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Shout out to my English teacher, Miss Lindsay, for passing me anyway.
Well, returning to Their Eyes Were Watching God after more than 30 years, I was excited and also filled with dread because for more than 30 years, I've been touting this as like a life-changing book among the best of the best, and remembering back to some of the potentially problematic parts, which I'm sure we'll discuss today, I got a little worried about well, what if it's not all that great? And will that crush me? But I can report with some relief that for me, yes, it's still a brilliant book. I will continue to recommend it. And it was nice to revisit it.
This is my first time ever reading it. I'm really glad that we had this podcast to force me to, because it's been on my to-do list forever. And I'm so glad I did. And I agree. I don't think I would have had nearly the same experience reading it as a teenager as I did when I was reading it as an adult. I loved it, and I am very excited to talk about it today. Also, shout out to the audiobook version. I don't know who read it, but
Ruby D.
Okay, it was so good.
Yes.
It was so good. And there's music. Highly recommend if you're looking to read it. All right, so I'm going to dive in on a plot summary. So Their Eyes Were Watching God is the classic 1937 story of Janie Crawford and her life as an African-American woman in Florida. Janie tells the story of her emotional and personal growth, starting from her first kiss beneath the pear tree outside her house, through 3 marriages until her 40s, after the tragic death of her third husband. Janie's first 2 marriages, the arranged marriage to Logan Killicks that her grandmother set up for her after witnessing her first kiss, and her marriage to Joe Starks, who installs himself as the mayor and entrepreneur of the all-black city of Eatonville, Florida, Janie is unhappy and stifled, finding herself to be nothing more than a prop for her husband's desires. It is not until Janie's third marriage to Virgil Tea Cake Woods that she can truly come into her own. Janie and Tea Cake embark on many adventures, but during the Okeechobee flood, Tea Cake is bit by a rabid dog, and Janie is forced to kill him after he threatens her with a pistol. Janie is ultimately found innocent, and after the trial, she returns to Eatonville, where she begins to recount the story of the book to her friend Phoebe.
Okay, I guess I'll take over with a little biography of our author. Zora Neale Hurston, now recognized as a prominent writer of the Harlem Renaissance, was born in Alabama in 1891 and raised in the town depicted in Their Eyes Were Watching God, Eatonville, Florida, the first African-American incorporated town in the United States. In Eatonville, her father was elected mayor 3 times, and her mother, a former country teacher, cared for the couple's 8 children. This solid family foundation crumbled when Hurston's mother died. Hurston was 13. She left home a year later to work as a maid with a traveling show and left the company while in Baltimore. She enrolled herself in school and graduated, and subsequently entered Howard University. Miss Hurston arrived in New York in 1925 and joined other artists of what became known as the Harlem Renaissance. In New York, she also studied anthropology under Franz Boas at Barnard College. She graduated and worked as an ethnographer, collecting folklore from Florida, Alabama, and also Haiti and Jamaica. Her many writings include essays, ethnographies, short stories, which are my favorite, an autobiography, and 2 novels. She continued to write, but had to resort to menial jobs to support herself through the 1950s and died in relative obscurity in 1960. Alice Walker revived interest in her work, Zora Neale Hurston's work, in the 1970s. Each episode, our luminous literarian Hawa will provide miscellany and insights from our book. It's time for Hawa's Headspace.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Hawa's Headspace, the part of the podcast where I literally say whatever comes to mind. For today's segment, I'm browsing through Goodreads to see what others have to say about Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God, a book that many consider to be a classic. Okay, so let's start off with the bad reviews. One of the first bad reviews gives it 1 star, and it says, "Sorry, but the dialect is hard to concentrate on for me, and I'm 1/3 of the way through without caring a whit for any of the characters, including Janie. This might be one of those rare books that would work better as an audiobook. My life is too short, and my reading time is too limited to continue to read on this one. So I am DNFing. I seldom DNF, and this is the second one in a week that I have given up on. I do hope I make a better choice in my next read." The next one says, this is another 1-star review, says, "Mea culpa. I just could not get into this, and I had to give up. The phonetic spellings and distinctive pronunciation slowed me down so much that reading this became a burdensome chore. Now I shall never know what a great book this is. I'll skulk away now." Yes, please, skulk away, because because so many people have this complaint about the dialect. I think it's understandable if you say, I struggled with this dialect, but I think to dumb down the story or make it seem like it's dumbing down the story is kind of like an insult to how great this book is. Now that we've heard the bad, let's hear some of the good. Okay, so the first 5-star review says, "I loved this with my whole heart." Honestly, same. So I think that the bad reviews don't get it, and the good reviews really get it, especially that last one. So join us next time to see what else is going on in my head. Okay, so let's get into this discussion. My first question for y'all is, how do you think this book held up? Was there anything that you guys felt might have been problematic, or just in general, how to hold up?
I feel like the book holds up pretty well, and it just feels pretty modern. Some of the conversations, they feel you could imagine them happening today. So that's like my first impression of how does it hold up. I even feel like some of the problematic aspects, you could still see that today.
I agree 100%. The only thing that maybe could have used a little more fleshing out is the portrayal of Native American people, and especially around where they moved to. I don't remember what it's called, but near the Okeechobee River. The Muck, yeah. Because they're kind of like these shadow figures that are oh, they're there. They fled. She doesn't even specifically say what tribe they're from. So it's kind of I think Deborah, you said a cardboard cutout, right?
Just these stoic people moving to safety across the just kind of 2-dimensional cardboard.
But I think it was supposed to show he was being ignorant there. Yeah. He was supposed to. And I mean, we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but there is this theme of kind of trying to create a hierarchy within minoritized groups, or trying to say one person is better than the other. And I think that kind of ties in with even, everyone has these beliefs that are not great.
Yeah, I thought that line was interesting because there's this kind of spiritual aspect of it. I felt like with Tea Cake's character, there was also this acknowledging this disrespect of nature and spirituality. And so that's what I got from that comment. Kind of comes up as a theme throughout the book, but I think that comment really struck all of us. But to me, I was like, oh, you're not respecting, what's happening.
The signs you're getting.
The signs,
This book as a choice for the podcast is definitely different from any other book that we've discussed, like, because Janie's character is not a child for most of the book. I feel like even though Janie was a child at the beginning of the book, and then her grandmother kind of just like married her off, there were certain like stages of like development that I feel like she didn't really get to, that most people kind of go through as like younger, that she didn't really get to go through until she got older, or even you could even say until she met TK. And there were certain things that she kind of put up with because she, in a way, was still childlike.
Yeah, I think this book has definitely coming of age story elements. And it's like every marriage is kind of a different iteration of herself or discovery of herself. For sure with TK, I think there's even a line in there where she says, I feel like I kind of lived life in reverse. Like she was older when she was younger. And then with TK, she gets to be like the kid she wasn't able to be. Those are themes that are important to discuss and talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah, because TK is actually always going on her for like, she's always talking about how old she is. And he's like, I think this might be towards the end, but he basically says something to her along the lines of like, you know, I feel like you spent your older years with other people and like your younger years, you really spent them with me.
Our coworker who recommended that we read this, and unfortunately she wasn't able to join us to record, but for her, this was a really foundational text that she, I believe, also had to read in high school, and was one of the few books written by a Black woman that she read. So thinking about, you know, representation and this idea of what books made you, to see that kind of, you know, have that be one of the first books that you learn in school that, you know, has an identity that reflects yourself, was really important. And I think that's, you know, a common experience.
For me, I kind of feel like it's a commentary on the Black woman's experience of having to feel like you have to be an adult when you're a kid. And so I find it strangely relatable, even though I was not sold off as a child to be married. But yeah, I do think that there's this kind of pressure for young Black girls to be, you know, kind of, there's a point where you're not seen as a child anymore, even though you are. And this book, I think, explores that in a really beautiful way.
I like that you said that, because I'm going to go back to this again. But like, so, you know, the whole thing with her getting sent off to get married was that her grandmother saw her kissing Johnny Taylor or whatever. But like her grandmother saw that and like assumed so much more. She's like, how long you been letting him kiss on you? And like, that was the first time she'd ever like kissed him. And she was like so devastated. She was like, it was really this innocent childlike thing that she was doing. Maybe not super innocent, but like it wasn't as like quote unquote fast as like her grandmother had like assumed. But I think there's always this assumption of like young Black girls being fast. And after that, she was just thrust into a womanhood, and her grandmother's like, make sure you do all this for your husband, and da-da-da-da-da. And she's like, I was just kissing the boy in the backyard like 5 minutes ago, and now I have to know all these wifely duties. Like,
but yes, I didn't even consider all the reasons you mentioned, but for me personally, it was a very I don't know what about it, but I credit her. She is part of the influence of why I went to study anthropology in graduate school. I mean, it was just something totally different than I had seen. And I read it a lot closer than you all to when it was rediscovered. So it was just not like anything I had read before. And it drove me to read everything I could find by Zora Neale Hurston or about her. And it definitely was a book that made me too, as well as an adult, a young adult. Mm-hmm.
One character that I thought was interesting was Mrs. Turner. So this is a woman, to jog your memory if you don't remember, she was a woman that lived in the muck. I guess she was like a lighter skinned woman, but she was very much like, I don't like Black people almost. Like she kind of, the way she talked about them to Janie was like she found them to be belligerent and she didn't like having them in her store, and almost like, why are you with Tea Cake? And she kept trying to push her brother onto Janie, to jog your memory a little bit. I don't know. How'd y'all feel about her character and some of the things that she said? And especially as it relates to like colorism and like.
One thing I also, like, we haven't said this yet, but this book is really funny. Like, it's very, like Zora Neale Hurston is very good with the turn of phrase. And when she's talking about Miss Turner, she says, Mrs. Turner took Black folk as a personal affront to herself, which I think is a very funny way to summarize her character. I think it's like just a very nuanced conversation, right? Like this, a lot of this book is about racism, but it's about, again, like we already mentioned it, but like the internal racism that you can have and how that can, backfire on yourself.
Right.
Like Miss Turner is a Black woman, but she wants to separate herself and she doesn't really even realize that she's doing that.
I think she knows exactly what she's doing. I think the thing is that the society is set up that way, right? Like, it's set up for you to, especially at that time, to hate being a Black person because being a Black person means that you're inferior. And clearly Miss Turner is someone who believes that she's not inferior. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, she's going to hate other Black people because anything that reminds her of her inferiority that she should not have in her mind is an affront. Like, absolutely. I find the character interesting just because I think you despise her because she's saying the things that other people in the book express but don't say. Even with Janie, I mean, the way she's treated and talked about, there's always this kind of, putting her on a pedestal because she is part white. And so even though maybe people don't have that like outward self-hatred, it's just like, to me, oozes throughout the whole book. It's almost like you can't completely dislike Miss Turner because you understand why she's the way that she is. You understand it, right?
I think it's like you feel, because Tea Cake makes Janie so happy, you feel defensive of Tea Cake. You're just like, if you don't leave her alone, she already married.
How dare you?
Yeah. But I appreciate what Elizabeth said, that I do think that Zora Neale Hurston, the writer, does view all of her characters here with empathy. And there is something in all of them, that I think I was mentioning earlier to Kelsey before we recorded, that even Logan Killick's, it's like, oh, thank goodness she got away from him. But, you kind of felt for him that he didn't know what he was doing and was just trying to make things work too, and the only model he had. So there's some understanding, at least some empathy for characters like Miss Turner or even Tea Cake if we want to go, he hits Janie to show his possession of her, which is shocking. But I think she writes them with such empathy that you feel something for all of them, some understanding. Mm-hmm.
Right. The internal dialogue of people is so beautifully written because you're right. The Mr. Logan, he's pretty pathetic in how she writes him, just because like he's absolutely hurt by the things that she's saying, but he can't express that. But you feel it in the way that Hurston writes it. Like, you're like, oh wow, like I'm kind of hurt by that. So I completely agree with you, Deborah. Like I felt bad for him. I feel like he probably, like, when she left, like, probably didn't cry, but, like, was just, like, devastated,
It probably took him a long time to get his confidence back.
Oh, gosh. I think she just didn't want to be with that old man. That's
she
just,
saw the opportunity.
Like, she was still young, like, a teenager. She wants to be with, like, stylish and man who's promising all these things. I get it.
When she's with him, that's when she realized that a marriage doesn't make love. Mm-hmm. And I think that for her has always been like a driving force, is like wanting to be loved and to feel love. Mm-hmm. And with Logan, she never got that.
I actually think that would be a good place to kind of go back and talk about the grandmother, because she does ask her grandmother, like, when am I gonna feel like love in this relationship? And she's just like, what are you talking about? It's funny. One of the things we're supposed to discuss is the generational expectations of what's required. And I think her grandmother, who I think was a slave at one point, she's like, I think love to her is having the freedom to not work,
Yeah.
This is why I said that it was modern, because even though, like, this is, somewhat far away, moved from slavery now, but that feeling of, like, one generation sees this is the way to go, and then the next generation is like, oh, I want to be in love, and like, it seems like a very universal theme to me. Maybe I don't know if everyone agrees with that, but
yeah. And then there's a part where I think she's like with not Logan. She's with Jody in the store, and she's just like, this is everything like I told my nanny that I ever wanted, or something like that. I don't know. Their dynamic was really interesting. Like he's like, oh, this is like my trophy wife. I don't want her to have to really do anything. But he also kind of like belittles her at certain points. And, you know, there's that part where I think she cuts the tobacco wrong or something like that. And I think he's trying to like belittle her in the store, and she doesn't take it. She's like, you're always talking. Why does my wrongdoings have to turn into you talking about my looks? Is something along the lines of what she says. And I was like, okay, girl, stand up for yourself. It's been like 20 years, but yeah, stand up for yourself. And and then he doesn't like that. And he like slaps her in front of all these people. And then I think from there is when he moves.
He never sleeps with her again.
Never sleeps with her again. He moves his cot downstairs, and not too long after that, he gets sick, and everyone tries to make it seem like she had something to do with it. And she's so sad that he won't let her in the room when all these people who ain't never come by before are like coming through. And I'm just like, poor Janie.
Yeah, I mean, I think a part of that is because she insulted him the way he insulted her. And even though, you know, she's been doing it for 20 years, it's like the one time she does it. I mean, I think even like the people around were like, oh, if someone ever did that to me, I'd just die. You know?
It was so dramatic.
And he died.
And Nanny had, you were talking about Nanny and how she kind of unwittingly, I think, prepared Janie for failure by just giving her more support and more self-worth than she ever had. And then so you don't know what you don't know. Is that what? and so just trying to figure this out. Nanny doesn't know what to tell her because she's trying to set her up for something better. But what does something better look like? And she, coming back to the mule, says something like, well, as far as I can see, who knows what the rest of the world is like, but and this is subtle, the way Hurston addresses what is usually very overt in some other African-American writers' books, I guess. But white men control everything, and then they put everything on, I'm certainly paraphrasing horribly, but on black men who, they don't carry that burden. They put it on the women, and the women are the mules of the world. Black women are mules of the world. And so that's her perspective. So what does it mean to not be this to have that role? Nanny doesn't know. Janie certainly doesn't know. And so you kind of have a mess with Logan and then a mess with Joe.
Right.
I don't know where I was going with that, but you were all stimulating those ideas in my head.
And I think for Joe to be such a person, like, you know, he comes to this town, he really brings it up and he establishes it. It's really interesting how easily he gets defensive over like Janie. Like, I think like he, in the beginning, like when people would sit on the porch, she would sit and chat. And then like, I think someone like he sees someone like staring at her hair, almost trying to touch her hair. And then he's like, no, you're going to cover up your hair. And so she covers up her hair from then on. And it's like, she's not allowed to sit out there and have conversation with people, but he can. And it's just like, he holds her up so high, but it's almost like, he's like isolating her in a way because he's worried that he's going to lose that.
Yeah, I do want to say, like, speaking of the humor of the book, I thought like the whole scene where Jody was setting up the town was like some of the funniest parts of the book, where he basically just strides in and is like, hello, I'm the mayor now. And like, here's my store that I built that you're going to go to every day. And here's my giant house that I built and my like little lady-sized spittoon for my wife. And like, it was just, I really enjoyed that like scene setting, and that really stuck out to me, where Janie's explaining why she doesn't want to stay in Eatonville and try to get married again after Jody dies, and why she wants to leave with Tea Cake. And she's explaining to Phoebe that like her grandmother's vision for her was to be like the white ladies on the plantation and just like sit on the porch and you know, drink iced tea all day and like have like this very like relaxed life. But when you don't have to, when your only job is to sit on the porch and like look pretty, you're giving up a lot of power there. And so it's not actually freedom to Janie. She'd much rather like have a more precarious life that allows her to make choices. And so it's like, again, it's like she tried one way with Logan. That didn't work out. She tried another way with Jody. That didn't work out. Okay, like let's present a whole third new option and see if that is going to make a difference.
I mean, I think it shows that there's a certain type of person that it takes to create a town. And it's not surprising that they might be a little narcissist.
No, that absolutely makes sense, especially for him to have been the mayor for as long as he was.
Yeah.
just have so many thoughts on Tea Cake. Like, it's just, I think reading the parts with Tea Cake it was just so beautiful and like sad at the same time, because beautiful because obviously, like, you know, she gets to experience this love, but sad because like it took so long for her to experience this love, I guess, in a sense, and also like how like he passed. Yeah, I don't know. Your thoughts on Tea Cake?
And how you wanted to wring his neck when he went out gambling.
God. I was so mad. I would not have given. I mean, Jane doesn't give in that easily, but like I don't know if I could recover from that situation. Cause like first of all, like I was so excited when she met him and left, and I was like, finally. And then she wakes up the next day and her $200 are gone. It's midnight and he hasn't come back. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, come on. Like,
we thought she was going to end up like Annie Tyler.
Yeah, and they tell the story of Annie Tyler and how she got totally screwed over. And I was like, no, like I can't do this again. And then when he comes back and he like makes her wait for the story, I was like, oh, Tea Cake, like you, no.
And then he just pulls up like nothing happened, right? Like, so like I think he's outside the door playing his guitar or something like that. And he's like, and she's like, Tea Cake, is that you? And he's like, who else would it be? You've been gone all day talking about so who else would it be?
He actually does something similar to that often. Like he'll just go for days and then like, not, and then just show up.
Yeah,
like he'll say, oh, I'll be here tonight, and then doesn't come for 3 days. Like, so yeah, he's very frustrating character, but very lovable at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that's liberating for Janie in a way to like realize like, oh, you can just like do whatever you want, you know, like you can make whatever choices work for you, and like I know that he loves me and is going to come back eventually. Like they have to kind of reach that understanding. Oh, I can just like follow my heart and like see what happens. And like, I know it's probably going to end up okay. Maybe doesn't necessarily work out for him every time, but, you know, like giving her that freedom that she's been looking for, I think it allows her to maybe cope with some of the frustrations that come with that freedom.
And at first she was hesitant. Like she was like, you don't want me. Like I'm older than you. You don't want me. You're just saying these things. And these are just your night thoughts. You know, you're just saying this. These are just your night thoughts, whatever, you know. And so he comes back super early the next day to prove that those weren't his night thoughts. And I was like, this is the cutest thing, low key. And she's like, stay and have breakfast. He's like, nah, babe, I gotta go to work. I got a job at 8.
It is a very romantic book in some parts. Like, I think I don't know. I don't think I picked up on that the first time at all.
You know, so she's with him in the town for a bit, and it's funny because the townspeople have so much to say, especially they want her to marry some other guy from I don't know where, but some guy who they're basically like, this guy has so much more money and so much more land. Y'all can just come together. And it's funny because it's like everybody has all these thoughts because of who her husband was. And it's just like, she's a grown woman. What about what she wants? But I guess that also just kind of speaks to like the time as well. Like, I'm sure like her just walking around town with this guy that she's not married to wasn't really like, you know, a thing. Like even the young man who works in the store is like, you know, you shouldn't be seen with him. Do you want me to walk you home? Like, this is not normal. And someone makes a comment about how, like, you know, I guess, like, in the beginning, she wears black because she's mourning. And someone says something about how, like, she's not wearing the black anymore. And she's like, the mourning period is over. Like, and she wears blue because Tea Cake likes her in blue.
Yeah.
Which I thought was so funny. And she's like, well, Jody never picked out clothes for me, so I'm going to wear what Tea Cake likes me to wear. And I was like, okay. This is a Tea Cake stan account.
Yeah.
There was a time where she did feel a fondness and a love for Joe. Like I don't because I don't want to completely dismiss that. I just think over the 20 years things changed, and it was more so she started to realize more of who he actually was. Like every person that Janie is with was important for their reason, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like you can't appreciate a Tea Cake without Joe. You can't appreciate Joe without Logan. So
speaking to like why her feelings about Joe changed, I think a lot of it has to do with her job in the store, being able to like, you know, develop relationships in the community and realize how like central and valuable she is as like the store manager, and seeing the dynamics play out that she's like wants to be part of but can't. I think like that gaining more confidence running the store by herself, like she's kind of nervous at first, like she doesn't know how to do, I think she talks about like not knowing how to do some of the accounting or something, and she gains that confidence to the point where after he dies she runs it by herself, no stress, you know? So I think that's a piece of it too, is like she kind of gains some independence that way. And then as she sees like she's trying to carve out more of a space for herself and he like crowds her back in, I think that's where the tension comes in.
Yes, absolutely. I love Janie for her tells it like it is. It's just like, this is how I feel. This is where I am now. And so this is what I'm going to do. And I don't really care what anyone else thinks, which I think is a little, the author sharing a little of herself with us. And I still think that that's a modern theme that's still important today. We still are bombarded with what we should or should not do, how we should, concern about how others perceive us. And neither she nor Tea Cake seem to have that obstacle in pursuing their lives and what they think their lives should be. So they're flawed. They have their flaws.
They were definitely living their best life. They were going to like baseball games and like shows and fishing. And I'm like,
he teaches her to play like dice or dominoes or a board game that checkers. She was checkers. That's what it was.
Checkers. It was one of the first things he teaches her how to do, which I thought was interesting because when they used to play on the porch, like Jody wouldn't let her even be around that.
Yeah. So. And you know what I was thinking is so masterful about the way Zora Neale Hurston introduces him is like you've been set up to see like all the ways that men can kind of let her down over the years, and then Tea Cake comes in and you're like expecting it, and Zora Neale Hurston really plays with that. So like he teaches her how to like play checkers, but it's like kind of feels like it's just a ploy to like flirt with her, and then she brings him home or they go home together. I forget like what led to that, but you kind of feel nervous like, oh no, what's going to happen when they go to her house, but then nothing happens, and that's when she realizes like it's okay. Then you have this situation where he like disappears for 24 hours. Like each time you're kind of like, oh yeah, I knew all along he was going to be terrible, and then he kind of like comes back, you know? I think that's really like hard to do, and she does it really well throughout the book.
No, absolutely agreed, because even rereading it, I'm like, wait, I remember Tea Cake being this like great, love of hers, but I also remember that I never finished the book. So like, so in the beginning when she's coming, in the very beginning when they're like, all the people in the town are gossiping like, oh, Tea Cake no left her. I'm like, dang, did he leave her?
Yeah.
So I think that ending, but also the beginning was really interesting just because like, so there's the hurricane where everybody's leaving and they decide not to leave. And he saves her from the rabid dog, which we don't know was rabid at the time. And the dog bites him in the face. And he learns a couple weeks later that, he has rabies. And the doctor's like, well, I wish we would have gotten to him sooner. There's nothing more we can really do. He's going to die. I felt so sad.
It's very sad.
It's very sad. And
it's very frustrating though. Like that was one thing about, I think, both of their personalities, which is like a flaw for both of them. Like they're not the type of people to kind of be on top of things. I was so frustrated when they didn't leave. Like that was like, just like, you have a ride out. Like you're so likable that people like you're the first stop for someone who has like a way to safety, and you don't choose it. And then again, it's like, okay, clearly you got hurt very badly, and we just are just la-di-da, not dealing with it. So that was very frustrating for me reading.
Yeah.
And then, she finds the pistol underneath his pillow, and I'm like, wait, what's about to happen? I'm not gonna lie, because I didn't remember how it ended. I thought he ended up shooting himself. I thought that he just went mad with the symptoms of the rabies and just couldn't take it anymore. But it didn't make me think, I didn't at the time think, oh, maybe he was suspicious of Janie or felt like, for whatever reason. And even when he's sick, he talks about how, like Janie's going off to go talk to the doctor to get a medicine. And he's like, I know you're off with Mrs. Turner's brother. Like he's around here. And I heard da-da-da-da. And I'm just like, oh, poor Tea Cake. Like he's really just like, because he was never really that jealous seeming of a person for the most part. He did seem kind of confident with how he was with her, But also this made me kind of remember something that I'm sorry to backtrack. But y'all remember the part where like he's like has her working in the fields with her, and then there's the girl who keeps like trying to take Nunki or whatever her name was. I was like, girl, if you don't back up off of my girl's man, like what are you doing?
Yeah. That definitely upset me too. I was like, yep, I would have fought her too. Because it's like, also because you've read this whole book and you've seen like what she's gone through to get this love of her life. Like, yes, I definitely feel like some possessiveness makes sense there.
Yeah, and speaking to what you were talking about like her reverse childhood, like this and her 40s is her first time actually feeling jealous of another woman, which is a very like youthful, I think, first love feeling to have. So it is interesting that that develops so late, and it's very relatable when she goes through it. I guess the question is like, to go back to like the ending, the very tragic ending, like what do we think that does for the story instead of like just letting her like be with the love of her life forever? Like she's already gone through so much. Why did we need this like stressful, tragic, upsetting ending for her?
Well, it's not exactly the ending, though. We do have the frame with Phoebe.
True.
And that adds something for me with that question, in that you know that she's okay now in a way, and she has lived this life. She knows that is available, and I don't know. It somehow, putting it in the frame makes it easier to accept her lack of planning, as Elizabeth was. It's like, okay, she really she was not on top of this, but she's dealing with the consequences just fine. It's like, it's okay to be Janie, and it's okay to make these choices. Yeah. And even when the worst happens, it's okay. She's a survivor, or she's
So, like, you know, I think she was really just happy, like, that she got to experience him. Like, she's 40. Like, she could probably get married again if she really wanted to, but she probably won't, because I think that the love that she found with Tea Cake, she knows she's not going to find anywhere else.
It's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all.
Exactly.
For sure. That's the feeling I got from the end of this. And then also this, Deborah, exactly what you were saying. Like, she knows who she is now through all these experiences. And I feel like, as much as we love Tea Cake, I feel like if he was there, I think there's a line that alludes to this too. If like he had to die for her to like be herself, like still, like I still feel like all of her relationships, there was still this like possession of her, and true freedom is her experiencing love and losing it and then finding her way on her own.
I mentioned before we started recording that I think the title is interesting because it's not a very religious book, but to have the word God so prominently in the book, I think can be like, not a turnoff for people, but like you don't really know what you're signing up for, right? But in a lot of ways, it almost feels like the Tea Cake's death is like preordained, like the life that they lived and the life that they had to live in order for them to be in love. Like that's what she likes about him, is his chaotic energy. It's like all of those choices led to that moment. Until this very second, as I'm saying this out loud, I was like, I wonder why she picked that title for her book. And maybe that's why. What do we think? Discuss.
Zora Neale Hurston, from what I know about her, like she was really into spiritual things. Like it like kind of permeates a lot of her writing and her work. So I'm not surprised about the title. And I do feel like you're onto something with your train of thought there, because all I can pull from my mind right now is that just her work just permeates spirituality, like, and not like one that's necessarily a defined one. So I'm not surprised it's the title of the book, and just some of the talks about the bees and the trees and it just really makes sense to me.
Yeah, the tree imagery really stood out for me. There's so many references between her mother, who we haven't really discussed yet, but her mom being named Leafy, to like all the different ways she kind of uses the tree as a metaphor for being a person, being a woman, having different life experiences, the tree being the place where she starts and ends her story. very, very naturey spiritual. And their eyes are watching God is actually said when the hurricane's coming. So I guess the spirituality.
Can I read the line?
Yeah, do it.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So this is when the hurricane's coming, right? So the wind came back with triple fury and put out the light for the last time. They sat in company with the others in other shanties, their eyes straining against crude walls and their souls asking if he meant to measure their puny might against his. They seemed to be staring at the dark, but their eyes were watching God. I wanted to slide that in there.
She's such a good writer.
It's like that was one thing. I know we talked about this earlier, but going back, I was like, this is beautiful.
Yeah.
Like I was like, why didn't I appreciate this as a kid? I mean, we didn't talk about this part of it, and I hope I'm not going too far off track, but one of the hindrances for me reading it was the dialect part of it. It was hard to read it. Just it was different. It kind of reminded me of reading Huckleberry Finn, which I did not enjoy as much. And so I think that was like a big turnoff for me, and so it didn't let me enjoy the beautifulness of it. So yeah.
And the dialect, I actually have a different, and highly recommend her short stories as well, which many of them have dialogue and so include the dialect. So this is true of many writers, but I read her dialect out loud, in quotes, in my head, which not only helps me understand what it's trying to say, but I think there is a real rhythm and beauty to it after you've read it. By the end of the book, did you feel any different, Elizabeth?
Well, this time around, I listened to it, so the RBD version, and that helped a lot. It made me appreciate, because it almost was like, oh, it's like you really are hearing these conversations as opposed to me. I think also reading this book with the different context of age and experience, it's also the experience of having read other books, had other material to kind of go from, as opposed to, I mean, I was in high school, I was watching cartoons maybe at that time. Like I just wasn't. And I think I was taking more of like the assignment into it as opposed to like now as an adult just reading it for the experience and just enjoying the story. Yeah.
I want to agree. The audiobook version, I think, makes it, when you look at it on the page, it's intimidating. I was a little thrown by the way it was written at first because so I was mentioning before we recorded, we had a great conversation before we recorded that in the introduction to my book, there was a intro where they talked about its reception at the time. And some of the authors, her contemporaries at the time, Richard Wright, a couple authors like really panned it or gave it bad reviews. And one of the things they highlighted was the dialect, and Richard Wright called it minstrelsy. And to me, it did feel like a little bit like a caricature at first. But I read a review from Shirley Ann Williams, which is in another edition of the book.
This one right
here. Deborah's edition. And I feel like she really made it make sense to me. She says, to characterize her diction solely in terms of exotic dialect spellings is to miss her deftness with language. In the speech of her characters, Black voices, whether rural or urban, northern or southern, come alive. Her fidelity to diction, metaphor, and syntax rings, even across 40 years, it was 40 years at the time, in 1970, with an aching familiarity that is a testament to her skill and to the durability of Black speech. And I think, for me, the piece that I was missing is her expertise as an ethnographer, and that she truly, like, knew and lived as a person who grew up there, that dialect, and she was having a fidelity to the way, like, a consistency of it. It's not just like, oh, this is what I think it is. She really studied and made sure it was honestly interpreted.
And I think she loves it.
Yeah.
Like, this is a person who grew up in Eatonville, had incredible sense of the importance of who she was and the culture that she came from, and did not, I don't think she would subscribe to some of the, like, even Du Bois's idea of the top 10th of, I think she vehemently believed in the amazing stories that were on the porch and the worth of her characters, because she was criticized for not being more obvious about the oppression and the sheer horror that African Americans experienced because they were Black. She said, yes, I have experienced this, but I can't, something about like, I can't understand why anybody would deny themselves the pleasure of my company. It's like, it's beyond me. And I do believe she believed that.
Okay, Janie.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, that's what I'm saying. Like, she put a lot of herself in this game. I think another reason I say that this is very modern is because I think the conversation of how Black people are portrayed in literature and media is just one that feels like it's been since the beginning of media and literature and all of those things, because it's like a conversation that just happens over and over and over again. And Toni Morrison passed away recently, and that was she got similar criticism for her writing. And then if you want to like bring it up to now, I kind of it's a weird comparison, but I think a lot of like Tyler Perry versus Spike Lee, and just like, who is allowed to tell Black people's stories, and now as an adult, just really appreciating reading a book about Black people. Yes, they're experiencing racism. Yes, white people are doing whatever white people are doing, but they're just living their lives. Mm-hmm. And in 2022, it's appreciating to just read about people just living their lives, because sometimes you just don't get that. And yeah, Richard Wright was important. Yeah, we get it. But
why does that name sound so familiar? Is he Native Son?
Yeah,
Native Son. Yeah, okay. Yeah. And then it's like, okay, all
right, we get it.
Yeah, we get it.
Too.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because I feel like Zora felt that way back in the 20s. so it's, again, she was ahead of her time. Were there any other like final thoughts on this book? Like what we thought about it overall? Did we enjoy it?
Basically, every chapter started with a quote that I want to write down.
Yeah.
Well, if you start going down that rabbit hole, I recommend you read some of her short stories, the Drenched in Light or Spunk or Sweat. I mean, she even kind of pivots a little bit more between dialogue and the narrator, who the dialect or at least turns of phrase seep into the narrator. And sometimes she's a lot more rigid with that division in her short stories, but they're gems. They're gems.
I really, really enjoyed this book. I'm so glad that we did it for this podcast, and it's been great to actually get to have this discussion, because like I said, when I was in high school, I didn't finish the book, so I couldn't participate in the discussion for real because I didn't know what they were talking about. But no, it was really good, and I'm actually like taking part in this like 10 books, 10 decades challenge. So this kind of covers like one of the books for like a different decade. So.
Okay, yeah, I would just be ditto to everything everyone said. I really enjoyed it, and I appreciate like revisiting it now as a 30-year-old woman, being in like kind of like a similar age to where she is in the part of the book. So I appreciate this book. Now let's talk to someone who actually knows something about one of the main topics covered in this book.
My name is Tamara Wellons. I am a singer and a songwriter and producer of R&B, jazz, whatever I can get my hands on to sing.
You have written and performed a theatrical concert called Songs for Janie. Janie being Janie Crawford. Yeah. When and how were you introduced to Their Eyes Were Watching God?
I read the book. I was 17 years old when I first cracked the pages open of the book. I hadn't read it completely, but I was in forensics class with my teacher. It was an after-school program, and I had to deliver a speech. I had a choice between The Ballad or the Bullet with Malcolm X, an excerpt from Their Eyes Are Watching God, and something else. I don't remember, but I ended up doing both of those pieces. But that's how I was introduced to the book. And it was the scene where Janie was having a conversation with her grandma in the kitchen. I was always intrigued by her work from that point on, but I didn't fully get into the book until I went to college Me and my roommate, we just got into it. We were reading back and, partner reading and underlining. And for some reason, that book struck me. I can't say for some reason. We all know we love that book. There are many of us who love that book. So I became another type of fan. But I related to the story of Janie as a young girl.
It's been 10 years now, but how did it become the inspiration for Songs for Janie?
So I wanted to work on a new body of work, music, a new collection. And I had a friend who was really good with coming up with conceptual ideas and things. And I reached out to her about helping me decide, how I wanted to present myself musically for this next project. Understanding, my roots in Southern Virginia, and I'm a country girl or a Southern girl, as some might say. And one of the concepts that she came back with me, she was like, Tammy, I like this. You should do Songs for Janie. During that time, it was very easy for me to write. I was a new mother, still newly in my marriage, but it was coming to an end. So when I started writing the book, writing the songs, I think that was like 2009. By the time I finished, I was going through a divorce, and writing that music became, a healing place for me. I could see myself in Janie, in her ending of her marriages and her growing as a woman. And I just related to it in a very strong way. I feel like I became Janie. I just poured a bit of my experience into the songs, of course. It's hard for me not to do that as a songwriter. Zora Neale Hurston's work influenced me. I can't even explain how I became one with the literature to be able to write the songs.
I was wondering if you feel different about the material in Songs for Janie now, and with Their Eyes Were Watching God, now that some time has passed, and yeah,
I do feel differently about it. The character Janie, her journey from being a maiden to a matron, and to this independent woman who's found love for, herself first, and then was able to, find other love. Oh my gosh. There is a different sound that I want to present in that work.
Songs for Janie includes porch tales. I was wondering how those were staged, or whether they were staged, or how that came about. Explain what they are too. I'll
explain what they are, and then two, I wish we had staged the porch tales a little bit more, because I don't think we did enough of that. But let me just tell you. So where can I start with this? So reading the book, I could catch the language very well. It was hard for some people, but literally my family talked like that. So I could follow it once I got it felt a little musical too. Once I got the rhythm of it, I was like, oh my gosh, this sounds like my granddaddy. It sounds like my Uncle Willie. It sounds like my Aunt Verdine and Aunt Charlene and my mom. And I just could hear the soundscape of the little town I grew up in, which is called Ivor, Virginia, in that work. So I think that's what captivated me from the jump. My family they're full of storytellers, and one in particular is my Uncle Willie, who just passed away. And he actually passed on January 7th, which is Zora Neale Hurston's birthday.
Wow.
And I'm just connecting the pieces right now.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
He was such a griot. He kept all of the stories, and he made them hilarious and funny. And he could just go on and on and on. And so much of him reminded me of some of the characters in the story. So I wanted to have, and we're talking about people sitting out on the porch, just talking, joking, playing, recalling, making up stories, and having fun. Sometimes arguments, all of that. I wanted to capture some of that from my real family. So that's my real uncle, Uncle Willie. And when I told the family this during the funeral time, I was like, I've always wanted to record my uncle because he's just unique. And now I feel like I have an opportunity to honor his voice too, with some of the recordings I have. So
that is such an important part of the book as well. And I guess that's because it is such an important part of our experience. That
it really is.
Yeah.
It is. Congregating and assembling. And, I think about how when Black folks get together, I'm sure in other cultures as well, but particularly Black folks, we're laughing and loud and, making jokes and just falling out laughing. And it's just so entertaining. I learned so much, about people. It's so much character and personality, like all of that. It really gets, Zora Neale Hurston captures that. And it's just one of the things I love about her work and who she was.
As a musician, to recognize this and kind of be doing a similar thing, capturing important truths or I
wanted to do a documentary on my hometown, and it started with the Songs for Janie. So when I started getting recordings of my uncle and my mom and catching some of these memos, then at first it was like, oh, I want to put it on the album, like, which is a form of print, I want it to be, heard. And then, my interest in capturing the history of, the town and the people, it grew. So I can say that it was because of that work, and what Zora Neale Hurston's life was about, heavily influenced my creative projects.
How can listeners find more about Songs for Janie and the other projects that you are working on and have worked on?
Well, I have a website. It's tamarawellonsmusic.com, and you can go there to hear more about my work in general. But you can also stream the Songs for Janie on Tidal, on Amazon. Like I said, thank you, Deborah, for this conversation, because it really sparked something. One, I didn't remember that it was 10 years. And two, with my uncle passing this year and the listening to the work, I do feel inspired to re-release, reimagine the music for Songs for Janie.
All right. So it's time to launch into our game. And because BuzzFeed has a quiz about everything, we were able to find a quiz where we can find out which Their Eyes Were Watching God character each of us is. So first question, what is most important to you? Love, wealth, or happiness?
I'm torn between love and happiness, but I think I'm going to go with happiness because with happiness, hopefully comes love.
I'm torn too, but I'm going to go with love because it's a more, I'm expanding what love means to be pretty all encompassing, I guess.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, I was torn between wealth and love, actually. But I chose love. I think that's important.
I went happiness because I think love and wealth can bring happiness. But I respect anyone who just says wealth.
I thought about it.
All right. What would you do if you found $100? Invest it in stocks, hit the club, or shop? And I do want to say I'm really mad that it doesn't say $200 because that's an easy reference to the book.
Right.
Come on.
So my real answer would be like I would go out to like a fancy dinner or something because like that's my weakness. But I feel like I should say hit the club because like it's an experience and that's what I'm going to always choose. So I'm going to go with that.
Hit the club. Okay,
Hit
tea
the
cake.
club.
I'm going to say shop because my social anxiety is just not feeling the club. Granted, I know it doesn't necessarily have to directly be the club. Also, like, hit the club has me thinking about, like, a song, and I'm just going to go with shop.
Oh my gosh. My reality is not in any of those three because I would fret over whose it was and then not spend it at all, just keep it, which isn't investing either. But I'm going to say that in my ideal life, I would hit the club because I'm also looking for an experience.
I love that. Okay. What career sounds best to you? Politician, musician, or writer?
Musician.
Ooh.
I'm choosing writer of those three.
This is a hard one because I definitely would not want to be a politician.
No.
Sorry, Jody. I'm torn between musician and writer, but I'm not particularly good at either of these things. Right? Like I'm not good at making music. I don't know how to write. But I was talking about the other day. I was like, if I ever wrote a book, which I would never do, I would totally write an essay collection. So I'm going to go with writer.
Okay. I'm going musician. My dream when I was a kid was to be a pop star. So I'm going to let that dream live a little longer.
Yeah. And also, like, Hawa has totally foreshadowed that she's going to write a book of essays.
Oh, yeah, you gotta. You gotta.
Y'all are funny.
None of us will be surprised. Okay, what is your ideal vacation spot? The beach, a big city, or the countryside?
The beach, baby.
This is so pathetic, but big city is usually...
That's not pathetic.
Well, I live in the big city and then I go on vacation. I do like a bigger city. But when I think about it, yes.
It's like I want to be someone who will like the countryside, but I think I am a big city person.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go with that.
Ideally, I would pick a big city that also has like a beach really close by. But I feel like if I'm going on vacation, I want to do as much as I possibly can. So like a big city has more things to do.
I'm not trying to none of that. I just want to lay on the beach with my bikini, get some pictures with the books. No.
All right. What did we get?
I got Janie Crawford.
What?
So did I, and so did Deborah.
And so did I, which is really weird because we all had completely different
I don't think they put any other characters in this at all.
Who made this quiz? Our answers didn't overlap, not once.
Not at all.
Wait, who made this?
Who do you think you should have got?
I would have been one of those horrible gossips on the porch. Probably. No, but that doesn't fit at all either. I don't know. Was there some sort of just go about, do your business and don't you have the person that didn't even show up because they were so boring?
So it says here, Janie Crawford, you defy norms and you don't care what anyone else thinks about it. You're just looking for love, independence, and some adventure in life. And while it may take you a little while to get there, you won't let anything stop you.
I retook it with all complete opposite answers from all of us, and I did get Jodie Stark. So there is at least one.
Maybe there is a version where there are other.
Well, so I'm like, what would you have to say to get tea cake?
Maybe choosing wealth. I think wealth definitely throws it off.
Well, each episode we ask whether our book passes I'm realizing right now I've only read this word. Bechdel or Bechdel? Bechdel, good.
Bechdel.
All right, that was my instinct.
I think people say it either way.
Okay, the Bechdel test. The Bechdel test asks whether a work features two female characters who talk to each other about something that doesn't involve men or boys. So, does Their Eyes Were Watching God pass?
I don't think it does.
I was just about to say that. I honestly don't think it does. And it's hard because there are not a lot of female characters in this book to begin with. But when they do appear, they're typically gossiping about Janie and her experience with other men.
This one tore me too, but you were going to say something. I can tell.
No. I want to hear what you're going to say.
Well, I was thinking, I'm not sure it does either, but going back to the frame with Phoebe, she has a real friend here. And though a lot of what they talk about is kind of what's passed on, they do seem to have a warmth and some conversation that's not directly related to their, they're washing feet, I think Phoebe helps wash her feet, or it seems like there's something there beyond just.
I bet they have those conversations, but I don't know that they're on the page. It's like implied that those are happening.
Yeah. I will say, maybe this is a controversial opinion, but I do feel like the Bechdel test is quite limiting for this book.
Yes.
It just, a reality where this character is not talking in relation to a man kind of doesn't make sense, because men decide so much of how you can move in society. So, I mean, if it was the day where she could make her own decisions, then yeah, she's not going to talk about, I would hope there's like other things coming up, but it's just like what you do for your husband as soon as she gets married, that's like, it defines her life. So I think it's kind of an unfair test for this book.
Well, just because it passes doesn't mean it's a bad book.
Yeah,
I think it does. I think it is intended to speak to those social pressures. So I think you're totally right.
Right. I just felt like it's like, of course they're going to talk about men most of the book. It's just not, I don't want to negate the usefulness of thinking about that in media, but I feel like specifically for this book, it's just like, it was very unlikely that there was going to be any conversations.
Well, that's it for this episode of These Books Made Me. Join us next time when we'll discuss a book in which two sisters in Portland, Oregon struggle to get along. If you think you know which book we're tackling next, drop us a tweet. We're at PGCMLS on Twitter and hashtag These Books Made Me.